We are talking to Will Cain at night because he's such a big-timer. He is up in New York City right now this week, sitting in on Fox and Friends. And I'm going to dive into that in a moment here, Will. But first of all, we got a lot of listeners in New York. And I'm curious, a lot of people out there who would ordinarily maybe make New York City a part of their spring or summer rotation. What does it feel like in Manhattan? Does it feel like things are starting to get back to normal? You're staying in a hotel up there while you do the show. What's the vibe?
You know, it does feel like it's starting to get back to normal. The bars and restaurants are open. There's people inside. There's certainly people on the street because the weather is nice. The biggest difference, I think, in New York today and living in a place like Texas where I've moved is honestly it's the mask compliance and pressure. Now, Look, I'm against mask mandates. I'm for mask responsibility. And common sense would tell you you don't need to wear a mask in a small town in Texas, and you might in New York City. But that sort of someone's looking over your shoulder vibe and feel, and every time you walk into some place, oh, yeah, where's my mask, is much more pronounced in New York than a place like Texas.
You know, it's interesting. They've done away with the mask mandate in the state of Tennessee, I think. I'm not even sure that there was officially one, but I'm coaching Little League Baseball with my 10-year-old. So last night we had a practice for a couple of hours, and then I told him, hey, we'll go get dinner after practice, and if you want, we'll go get ice cream too, right? In the little I live in a part of Nashville called Franklin, which is about 18 miles south of town, for people who are familiar with Franklin, Tennessee. Really cool little downtown, walkable, whatever else. And because we were playing baseball, I didn't have my mask with us at all, and he didn't have his. We're outside on a field. And by the way, I am so glad to have baseball back, both major leagues and everywhere else. But last year about this time, we started Little League Baseball season, and then they just shut down the season before we were able to play a game. And then we've been able to play pretty much every other sport, which I'm sure your kids have been able to do in Texas too. But it's wild to me how many people living in different parts of the country have basically had sports shut down for their kids everywhere, right? Like we missed one baseball season. Otherwise, we played flag football, we played soccer, we played basketball, and now we're back into baseball season, which is cool. But it's wild to me the number of kids who have missed a year. And I talked to all the parents who were standing around talking, coaching. A lot of these kids haven't played baseball now in 2 years because they didn't necessarily play fall ball. And I'm just thinking, that was kind of a moment for me because that's the only sport that's been shut down for that long where I live in Tennessee. But there's lots of kids out there who haven't had that opportunity. And that's just a massive loss to your average kid, right? I mean, to take away effectively for many kids over a full year of being able to play sports and the lessons you learn, not to mention school and everything else. I mean, this is just such an absolute failure of American public policy on so many levels. But we talk about sports, and it certainly is one in the world of sports as well.
You do a good job of reminding me of the parts of New York that aren't back to normal. My kids are still in school in New York City because that school is 100% dedicated this year to being remote. That's
right.
Normal. And I will tell you, their soccer team that they were a part of for years is still stopping and starting and dealing with citywide shutdowns of this facility or that facility. So it's impossible to get a season going. I do want to say, before you move on to your next question, I'm familiar with Franklin, Tennessee. I do know it's sort of the seat of power. So you want to talk about big timers. Franklin, Tennessee, south of Nashville, runs that state. And here's why I know. You and I texted last week about our spring breaks. I spring break where you live. So I go to Tennessee, and my friends in East Tennessee, where guys like Lamar Alexander are from, lament that the seat of power has moved to right there south of Nashville.
Williamson County has got the governor and basically two different senators statewide, which is where I live, the county right south of Nashville. And it is a nice place to live, but that is where it used to be that there was, for people out there who are kind of political junkies, there was a pretty diverse group of where people would be elected from. In the state of Tennessee, Shelby County, which is Memphis, tends to be the Democratic stronghold. Nashville is a kind of a Democratic stronghold. East Tennessee is Republican, and sort of the surrounding communities around Nashville would be kind of the toss-up region. Now it's obviously a very red state, but it is interesting. And by the way, the story I was telling was we finished baseball practice, and I'm going out to get something to eat, and I realized that we don't have the mask in the car or whatever else, and it felt I didn't know if they were going to refuse service to us or whatever else, and I'm not going to be one of those people who throws a fit either way. but it felt good to walk into an ice cream parlor, be able to get a couple of scoops of ice cream, and just sit outside and totally feel like 100% normalcy. Now, it hasn't felt that crazy in Tennessee to begin with, but with baseball going on and then being able to just take a kid out and get ice cream, that definitely felt like a fun night for a dad and a son just to be able to hang out.
And it feels like you're living amongst people who still have common sense and still some sense of grace.
Yes.
In other words, you lost your mask. You don't have your mask at this moment. We don't have to throw a major fit about it. Let's move on. Everyone's going to be okay. Where in places like New York, it's like an absolute and a moral failing if you don't have your mask.
We're talking to Will Cain. You can follow him on Twitter at Will Cain, Fox and Friends this mornings as well as all mornings this week, usually on the weekend. How do you like – one of the challenges of anybody who does early mornings, and you do it on the weekends and now you're doing it during the week, what is the first thing that goes through your mind when your alarm goes off at 4 a.m. in the pitch black, wherever you might be?
They're not pleasant thoughts, man.
Yeah.
It's usually something like this. It's, I am going to bed earlier tonight. And by earlier, I tell myself, I'm going to bed at 7.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, I fail that every time.
Every time.
Especially in the NCAA tournament. I'm not getting to bed any before 9:30 during the tournament. But even when it's not the tournament, it's hard. Now with daylight savings, it's still light outside. By 8, you're telling yourself, I probably should, but the rest of the world's still awake. It's hard to go to sleep when you can get yourself a full 8 hours. That's the first thing I think, and I fail.
It is, amen, the biggest. I don't mind the morning, like the alarm going off in the morning. We've been doing this show for 5 years now. I'm kind of used to that. To me, the bad part is when you're laying in bed and a game goes into overtime or you just can't fall asleep and you look back at your clock and you start counting back the number of hours of sleep that you're actually going to get. That, to me, is the part that's bad. Like, the wake-up time, I'm like, I always think, a lot, and I'm sure a lot of people who get up as early as we do, I'm going to go to bed early or later tonight. I can't wait to lay down and not have to worry about the alarm going off. But the time that is the worst to me is when you don't immediately fall asleep and you start looking back. Like, I have a clock that projects onto the wall in my bedroom, and you're there and you start counting down the hours. You're like, okay, I'm going to get 3.5 hours. Okay, I'm going to get 3. Or you lay in bed and don't immediately fall asleep. That, to me, is the worst part.
Well, do you take anything?
No.
I'm going to be real. I take melatonin.
Melatonin?
Yeah.
The melatonin stuff never really worked for me, and I don't now. I'm not a huge caffeine guy. I try not to have any caffeine after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which is probably too late to be doing it. But we got the Black Rifle coffee stuff, so I'll pop a little bit of that in the morning. And then a lot of times, the toughest part about my day over the last 5 years, as you well know, it takes a lot of energy to do television or radio well. And so the fact that mine are so separated, so I've got early morning radio and then I've got afternoon TV. If I could go into, morning radio into morning TV, and then I'd have like a normal schedule, but there's about 8 hours from the time when I sign off at, 9 o'clock Eastern until I come on at 5 o'clock Eastern, where I have to, be waiting to do TV as opposed to be basically done with my day.
Yeah, so I know you tweet all day, and you've got your Periscope show, so you're not relaxing. I don't know if you're getting a lift in there somewhere or what you're doing during that time.
I try to go into the gym. Yeah, as soon as I finish the morning show, I try to hit the gym, get a good workout in there, but then the days just kind of like I lose control of them. So that's the biggest challenge and so I always like to ask other people who are getting up in the morning, kind of what their procedure or process is by which they do that. And how it impacts you.
The biggest mistake, I'll say this, and I haven't been doing it as long as you, I don't think, but the biggest mistake is if I lay down in the middle of the day. Like I say to myself, I'm going to get a quick rest in here, because then time starts slipping away from me. It's like I'll waste it on things that I shouldn't be wasting it on. So you just got to stay in motion. That's the thing I feel like. Go to the gym, do the next project, go do the next TV hit, whatever. If you stay in motion, you're fine. If you sit down and relax, you're done.
I also learned this in law school. and because you're busy in law school, and that was the first time I'd ever really been busy. And in retrospect, I think we've talked about this before on the podcast, until you have kids, you aren't actually that busy. So for all the single guys out there or girls who are listening right now and they're like, oh, I'm working so much, I'm so super busy. No, you're not, right? But I thought I was really busy in law school because you're trying to do the briefs and you're trying to read all the different assignments and make sure that you're on the ball for class the next day and everything else. And so I read somewhere, and I do think it's accurate, that the right time for a nap is like a 25-minute nap. So on a decent number of days, I'll lay down for like 25 minutes, set my alarm. That's as long as I'll do it. And that doesn't manage to make me feel awful, because I do find if you lay down for a nap and you don't get to sleep as long as you want, you wake up feeling worse. And so that 25-minute nap is kind of like a punch. It helps.
Wait a minute, and I don't know that your listeners signed up for this conversation, but where'd you go to law school again?
Vanderbilt.
You went to Vanderbilt, which is a great law school. I went to the University of Texas. I found law school to be a different experience than the one you just described. Man, I had a ball. Like,
well,
let's say law school is a 3-month semester, right?
Yeah.
For 2 months, I had a ball. I was on Austin, Texas. I was on 6th Street. I was probably 50, 60, 70% chance I made it to class. UT has a big law school, so you're and they're not taking attendance or anything like that. It's just sort of like, hey, it's on you if you want to do well. Yeah. And so on the flip side, what it was a month then of I didn't leave the library. So I was cramming, reading outlines, reading cases.
Yeah.
But for 2 months, it was awesome. And I was busier in college. I played water polo in college, so I was up at 5 a.m. to get morning practice in. I had afternoon practice. So I had to jam a ton to my college days. Law school, that was a party, man.
Yeah, so I think law school was the best 3 years of my life. I had so much fun with it. But that first year of law school, I'd never been a nap guy before. That first year of law school, I was trying to read all of the assignments because you really don't know. I mean, and I always say, like, to my kids, it takes a while to figure out what the pace at which you need to run is. And then once you realize what that pace is, by my third year of law school, I didn't even buy books. I mean, I legitimately did not have a single book.
Right.
Yeah. And I just chilled. I mean, I loved all 3 years at Vanderbilt. But that first semester, I was like, man, there's a lot they're throwing at us and all the reading and everything else. And so anyway, that's when I learned, like, hey, a 25-minute nap can make a difference. But I still think that that's kind of the key out there. If you can lay down for 25 minutes, if you're working super hours or you're getting up super early in the morning or whatever it might be, makes a big difference. All right, big story out there. I'm curious what you think about this story. I've been writing and talking a lot about it. Deshaun Watson. The number of accusers continues to grow. You're a Texan. You may even have had some experience with these guys before. Rusty Hardin, big-time criminal defense attorney for athletes. He's had Roger Clemens. He's had Adrian Peterson, among others. And then you've got Tony Busby, who is one of these big, larger-than-life plaintiff lawyer characters who is now representing, I think, 14 official lawsuits have been filed. He says 24 women have said that they've been victims of sexual assault from Deshaun Watson. How do you assess a story like this? And do you think, my argument is that this is one of the areas where sports media fails in many respects, because so much of the way that we cover stories are about identity politics-laden issues, even in sports. And when you've got, on one hand, 14 different women, the majority of whom are minority, according to Tony Busby, and then on the other side, you've got a black quarterback in Deshaun Watson, it's like people don't really know how to analyze this story because there isn't an easy villain and there isn't an easy hero. The victim ideology is all messed up. Do you buy into that being a particular challenge in the era in which we live now with sports media?
Okay, a couple of things. You're exactly right on Rusty Hardin and Tony Busby. There is, in Texas, a real culture of the celebrity lawyer, and they are two of the celebrity lawyers. If you want to know one of the most famous celebrity lawyers in Texas, his name is Joe Jamail, and he was the plaintiff's attorney in the famous Texaco versus Pennzoil case where he made, I think, $300 million in contingency fees.
Wow. Yes.
And if you want to see a fun video, go to YouTube and look up Texas-style deposition. Joe Jamail did have the Texas Longhorns field named after him because he paid for it up until this Black Lives Matter movement in the past 6 months, and they renamed it, I believe, Earl Campbell Ricky Williams Field, something like that. But back to the point at hand, Clay, you and I think, and I don't know this because we've only met in person once, but I think we have different personalities, but we have very similar points of view. I think we're lockstep on this, and I've noticed over our careers we're often in the same place on these types of issues. I am a big believer in innocent until proven guilty. I'm a big believer in benefit of the doubt. I do not try people in the media by accusation. I just won't do it. I think it's wrong, and I think it has a horrible track record of success. When I was at ESPN, I saw it happen over and over and again. And the reason why is exactly as you described. Because most of the sports media picks identity politics and assigns heroes and villains before any facts or evidence are known. And it's not just sports media. It's happening in the last couple of days when it comes to real media as well. It happened with the Colorado shooter, as people defined him as a white mass shooter until it came out that he was an Arab man. And that then undercuts the entire narrative they ran with for a good 12 hours that it's white supremacy in action again. The point I'm getting at is most of these people are not just irresponsible. They're doing the devil's work of not pursuing justice according to the facts and evidence, but rather through the lens of their identity politics and their vision of heroes and villains. So when it comes to Deshaun Watson, I don't know. I will not convict him in the media. There's a lot of smoke. That means there could be fire. It's a problem, and it will be a major story, Clay. Either way, if the charges are trumped up and false, major story. If Deshaun Watson has a major fall from grace because he's a serial predator, major story. But I don't need to come to a conclusion before everybody else and before the facts and evidence.
So here's my thing on it in general, and I'm going to write about this later today, I think, to kind of lay out everything that I've said on the radio so far. To me, and this is, I think, an easy illustration that people out there listening to us can understand. They've probably seen the scales of justice, and that's basically like you're weighing guilt and evidence, guilt and truth on either side of that scale. And if you look at it, almost every one of those representations, justice is blind. And a lot of times I think we overlook that, but that is a significant aspect of the judicial system. It is that we all have biases, whatever they may be. And the best rendering of justice could be brought to bear if you don't even know who the parties involved are, and you can just consider the evidence and weigh it on one side or the other. And to me, what identity politics represents far too often, and I think we're at the worst level of my life that I can remember, is people hear, oh, this is an Asian man, and they think, oh, okay, well, that means one thing. Or this is a black woman, and that means another thing. And the way that you and I were trained, me at Vanderbilt, you at Texas, is you got to look at the facts. And the facts, we need to make justice blind. And look, our judicial system is far from perfect. Anything created by men is incredibly imperfect. But it's the best judicial system, I really believe this, that has ever existed in the history of the world. And the way to make it better is not by trying to adjust the results based on the identity, the race, the gender, the religion, the sexuality of any of the people before the court. It's by simply looking at the evidence and treating everybody the exact same to the best of your ability.
And our colleagues in the media literally scoff at the idea of Lady Justice wearing a blindfold, of justice being blind. They literally scoff at that. You know, Clay, you and I both have been accused on numerous occasions, and let's just put it out there and be real. We've been accused of being racist. Now,
all the time. Again, and sexist, by the way, and homophobic. But yes, anything that you can, because it's not, and sorry to cut you off, but those arguments are never made based on individual cases, right? They're just kind of tossed out willy-nilly ad hominem in an effort to try to keep you from being involved in a conversation. That's what's happening.
Well, if I look at the instances where I have received that insult the most, and I think this applies to you as well, because, again, I keep up with your career, it's been in cases and stories that come up where I am reluctant to indict at the speed at which everyone else in the media will do so.
Right.
Bubba Wallace, George Zimmerman, whatever the case may be. If I say, wait, not only do I not know if this person is guilty, much less can I find out what his motivations were and whether or not race was at play, then in turn I become an apologist and I am a racist.
Yes.
That's the game that is played. So in other words, Lady Justice wearing her blindfold, seeking to look at things through facts and evidence, is what has made people call you or me or anyone else who deigns to do this a racist. And I'm just not going to play that game, and I will go down with the ship on this fight. And because I believe that society is flipped. I believe, and you and I have talked about this in the past, and I want to be more clear about this. I believe that racism is in vogue, that looking at people through the prism of their skin is what's popular. They're just calling it anti-racism now. They're not looking at people as individuals. They're not looking at individual circumstances or facts. And every time I turn around, they want to impose upon us our divisions and our differences and our divide. And I'm not going to play the game anymore. That is a racist mentality and has to be called out for.
I agree with you on that argument in a big way. And I'll mention a couple here. Michael Bennett, remember initially everybody says NFL, so many of them. Yeah. So many of them, but as they intersect in the world of sports, Michael Bennett says, hey, Las Vegas police were racist against me. Everybody in the NFL media and sports media in general, oh, you poor guy, Michael Bennett. Well, then they release like 120 different camera angles, and none of his story is upheld by the data that they release, right? And by the way, that story immediately disappeared because the shooting happened in Las Vegas almost right after, I think the same weekend that the Las Vegas police released that report, the LeBron James racist graffiti incident on his gate, that there's never any evidence actually occurred, that the Los Angeles Police Department were never able to determine ever occurred. Everybody just accepts that LeBron's gate was had a racial slur on it. There's never been any evidence that it actually occurred. The Los Angeles police investigate that, find no evidence of it whatsoever, never bring any charges against anybody, and that story just disappears. And really what I want is, and I think you understand this, and I think it's important for our listeners to as well, if you're going to be arguing hashtag believe all women, which many people did during the Brett Kavanaugh impeachment hearing, then you need to recognize the flaw of that when you're not saying a word about all of these minority women who are accusing Deshaun Watson. The standard, whether you are a Supreme Court justice or an NFL quarterback or a regular guy that nobody knows at all, should be the same. That's what justice is blind means.
And look, when they play their victimhood hierarchy or their heroes and villains games according to identity politics, they don't know what to do when there's a conflict. I do, because if I follow due process, benefit of the doubt, and I also believe in second chances in life, then you'll find me at times also taking what was an unpopular position in the sports media environment of suggesting Greg Hardy deserves another chance to enter the professional workspace, or me defending Ezekiel Elliott.
He should have never been suspended. Like, that was one that they got totally wrong in the NFL.
Right. So the point, and that's an example of race isn't what this is about. It's about whether or not you're going to try and convict people based upon things that have nothing to do with the individual facts of their circumstances.
Outstanding stuff as always, Will Cain. Keep knocking it out of the park on Fox and Friends. Enjoy the rest of your week, and hopefully we'll talk to you next week.
All right, man. Take care.